to call Paul City Council Audit Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. It is great to see you for our March meeting. I hope everyone made it through the slush okay. It's not even slush, it's slush. And we have a busy agenda with a number of different reports and findings to hear from today, so I will get us started. So our first item on our agenda is to continue discussing two potential topics for further study that came out of our budget process. Our budget analyst, Ms. Houston, had been looking into those topics and came today to give us a little bit more detail than she had when we last spoke, and following up on some of our recommendations. Since we last met, there's been some news about Holly's next steps career-wise, and so I'm also going to let her share that information with all of us when she comes up. So the suspense won't kill you for long because she's coming up right now. Welcome, Ms. Houston.
Councilmember Naker and Audit Committee, thank you for having me here today. So as Councilmember Naker said, I've had the pleasure of being the City Council's Chief Budget Officer for the last 7 years, and I did accept a job with the St. Paul Port Authority as their Director of Lending Services. So tomorrow is my last day. And so what you have before you today, I don't have any fancy PowerPoints, but you do have 2 Word documents that kind of tee up the issue, or at least start it for somebody who will be backfilling me. So the JPA proposal, I will start there. And so this one is the least flushed out of the 2, but I also have some information to share on the next one. So we'll just take it one at a time. The JPA proposal. So there's many joint powers agreements and contracts that the City of St. Paul has with different organizations or municipalities, or even our district councils for some lease space in different parks and rec. The list is expansive. So I think in order to study this, there needs to be some focus. And so you could look at a department focus. You could focus on municipalities, so maybe all Ramsey County JPAs, or all the state of Minnesota transportation. You could also focus on service area and look at a certain service that you want to focus on, and see if we meet our cost, if we have cost recovery for, I'm going to make something up, mowing let's say we mow at a school district where the rec building is right next door. I don't think we do that, but I'm just, that's an example. Or you could take a look at how long has the JPA been in existence? So is it, and has it been updated recently? So there's some different ways you could narrow it down on how to study this further. And I believe last year there was like 64 items that came through the council agenda that if you search up joint powers agreement, it populates. And this is an example of some of those. And so I'll just stop there. If there's any questions on that portion so far.
I have one, Ms. Houston, and first of all, a huge congratulations, as I know I've said to you in private, but I want to say it again publicly. We're extremely sad to see Holly go, but we're also really excited that she's going to be just up the street at the Port Authority, continuing to work with the City of St. Paul. So we know this is just farewell, and we'll see you very soon up the street. Goodbye. And really glad that you were able to get these in place before leaving, because I think that positions us really well for the next person to take these on. My question is, you mentioned 4 areas of potential focus. I'm wondering if a 5th one could be the size of the JPA, so the amount of money in question. And I guess I'm just wondering, is that a focus that's easy enough to determine without like doing a whole study and to be able to say these are the ones that we'll study? Does that make sense?
Councilmember Naker and committee, the challenging issue, I mean, really a good place to start for this one is what is this universe? What is a list? We do not have one conclusive list of where these are all stored. So it would take a search and then to just list them and then jot down how much each one costs, when was the last time it was updated. So that would be a good place to start, and then it'd allow you to break it down, because I think that's a great idea, because last time we talked about the risk factor, the materiality of it. So by looking at the amount of the contract or joint powers agreement, that would be one way to scale it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I can make those I can maybe add a portion on here of recommendations or next steps, and that would be the research phase, I guess. So, and really the risk with cost recovery, number 3 on page 2, that the city might not be covering our full costs for services. There might be a good reason for that, but it's good to know why. It also is good to know where's that money coming from, or what are we not doing because we're doing this. The other thing that this study might find is that the city is receiving more than their cost, and so that we would have to pay money back, and that would be a risk. An increase in fees may create financial hardship, so we may find that we have fees that are not affordable, but don't put someone in a position where they're at that breaking point of financial hardship where they need to make a choice about housing or a car or food, or we don't want to put them in a position where our fees outprice them out of just their normal day-to-day life. And then a fee study may not capture in-kind agreements between municipalities. So sometimes there's those handshakes or those in-kind salary costs that aren't always factored in. And so to capture that and document it would be good. And then affected parties would just be city departments, other municipalities, state, county, school districts, nonprofits, district councils, and I'm probably missing some, but that's the big ones. So that's an overview of the joint powers agreement proposal. With the fee recovery proposal, we talked last month about during the city council's budget process, the Department of Safety Inspections mentioned that we're not recovering our full costs with abatements. And I did talk with Director Weezy just last week about this, and the department is currently working on changing the fee model and evaluating different options. Nothing is prime time to share, but they're actively working on that. And working on it for the next budget cycle. From what I learned is that sometimes when the city has these fees, there's different departments that work on it. So abatement the rates are really set by the Parks Department because they're doing the work, but the DSI is managing the program. And so sometimes you just need to get a whole bunch of people in the room and make sure things are right-sized. And also, is that the way it should still be working, or is there different options that they could look at? And I am assured, and I believe that they're looking at all kinds of options, such as contracting or how we work within a city to make sure we're covering as much cost as we can. And DSI, each part of the budget process, they do review all of their fees, and they go through a process where they're looking at staff time, who's doing the work, and then what is that person's salary and benefits, and then figuring out how much that service costs. So they do have that documented. And there are some policy decisions where the fee for service is not implemented, like rent stabilization, the Homeless Heart Encampment Program, and graffiti. So those services we aren't charging like the property owner for graffiti. Councilmember Brenmoen brought up about vacant building fees, and should there be a different rate for commercial versus residential? And with talking with the city attorney, Teresa Scarda, she'd have to really take a look at the legality of that, and if it's even legal to charge different rates for different property types. And then just anecdotally, Director Weezy thought that the opposite might be true, that residential homes might be actually more expensive to monitor than commercial buildings. There's tends to be break-ins and damage in residential homes. So that's information there. So they would have to look into that more to be able to answer that question. And so then the next section just gets into what, before I talk to Director Weesey, what I would be looking at is, and what questions I'd be looking to answer. So is the city's, what is the city department's annual review process? And I think that would just be really documenting it. We understand that they do a time study and they look at it each year and they increase their rates each year. This year they increased them across the board by 8%, and then a few that were, they increased a little bit more that were costing us more. The study could look at how fees are determined. So we know about staff time. Are they also factoring in, what rate do they factor in for overhead or administrative costs? What rate do they factor in for vehicle wear and tear, gas, that type of thing? What percentage of the city costs are covered by the fee? So I think in some of the studies that I looked at, they had a big, massive spreadsheet of what are the fees, what's the cost, when were they last updated, and is there a gap? And then it would be good to document if there's barriers to charging the full cost, document risks and who's impacted, record any other considerations if the current process or policy was to be changed, and then recommendations for next steps is how I was setting it up. So I thought this project would take me, oh shoot, I didn't total. I did in my working document. Oh, total hours, let's see. 50, 60, and 12, and 12. So that is 134 hours, I guess. And I was thinking it would take about approximately 3 months to complete. And that's a very generous timeline. As I think with the Department of Safety Inspections, they have a well-documented process so that it may take quicker.
Questions?
I have maybe fewer questions and just some things to consider with both of these. With the JPA proposal, it seems it's looking at them individually, and the focus around are each of these individual meeting anticipated goals, and do they cover the city's costs? But I would think it would also be worth within that understanding the individual, but then what is the purpose or what is the goal overall when the city's deciding to go into a JPA? What are they trying to achieve? And is there an overall policy or kind of document saying, like, these are instances where it makes sense for us to achieve these goals we can't achieve on our own? And so that could help, like, put a relative, like, if it's something that just meets the public good, if it's something that, we can't do on our own and here's the reasons, like, deciding what level of maybe costs we're willing to take on, or what kinds of relationships and how we benefit from that on kind of a larger level by analyzing the individual ones. So in that conversation with the areas, what are we trying to achieve? What is the goal of having a JPA? Why do we do it versus not? And so kind of considering those bigger policy goal implications of it within that study scope as well.
So just to make sure I understand, are you saying that could help us, say, set a policy for when we do and don't enter into JPA?
If we knew what the city was trying to achieve by entering these relationships, having that larger goal in mind. So does this make sense? And then also if there's, money exchanging hands, the relative importance of different things within that, right? Like how closely this meets our goal. Is it filling a gap we couldn't otherwise fill on our own? How does that inform those negotiations? And kind of having some like values or policy framework that's guiding that work. And so using these individual instances to think of that bigger picture. On the fee recovery proposal, it's a similar vein, but like taking that thought about what are we trying to achieve through these fees? Are we trying to motivate someone to do something? Are we just trying to cover costs? What is the purpose beyond just cost? And where is the public good? Because there's certain things that as a government entity and a public entity, we want to be doing because it's for the public good. even if it means we don't make money or don't cover our costs. And so where are those instances where, and it having, sort of a policy guidance framework that comes out of this that can say, this is for the public good, so we're just going to break even on it, right? Or we're willing to take a loss on this versus we're really trying to motivate this, sort of a sin tax in a way, like why cigarettes and alcohol have higher taxes in a way. So thinking through like what is that public good and how does that look in these instances, and I would hope that as part of this, that fees that fall on individuals, that there's some sort of race equity or economic equity analysis that's part of this, because if it's falling more heavily on certain communities of color or low economic class or situations like that, maybe it's something to think about that as we're making decisions about where's the public good. Mm-hmm. And so like those are some things I just recommend maybe thinking through or having as part of it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Prince.
To your point, Dana, I think that the JPAs logically seem to be aimed at helping us achieve something jointly where we bring different expertise to the table, that some department may have the professional expertise here, and this one might have whatever. The idea that that would not be the case, or that we don't evaluate them that way, is an interesting thought. I mean, when I just look through the list and I think about that, I mean, that's a question, that's a good question.
Ms. Houston, one question I had about the departments you suggested working with for the fee recovery. I know you said DSI is already doing a great deal of this work, but it looks like you're still suggesting working with them and also 3 other departments, OFS, CAO, PED. Can you just speak to why you suggested the departments that you did and what you think we would do with DSI, given that they say they're doing this process already?
Councilmember Naker, that is a good question. This came up as what do we know that we're not recovering our costs versus creating a larger project. So this is just stemming from what did we hear at budget process. And so we did hear about the abatements at the budget process, and since then they've taken action. So I guess my recommendation would be to follow up with them and expect something at the next budget cycle. And then PED, I believe, is involved in some of these property work as well, so that through abatements, they have their own HRA properties that they hire someone to, I believe, contract and just keep it mowed and to maintain it. And then Office of Financial Services, it's just good to involve them when any money is involved, just to make sure that we're tracking it accurately and matching up costs. And then the city attorney's office, they had mentioned in their budget presentation that they were working on making sure that they're recovering as much administrative costs with their grants through PED. Oh, that's the PED connection as well. So PED, the CDBG grant, the city attorney is making sure they're collecting some of their costs through that administrative portion of that grant.
Go ahead, James.
Thanks, Councilmember Naker. One comment and one question. I'm intrigued by what Dana was saying, because I was really just viewing this as a cost recovery thing and not actually thinking about other aspects with the fee recovery proposal in particular. And so I appreciate hearing some of those considerations, because I think those are definitely important besides just looking at it from a number standpoint. But looking specifically under 2 on project scope, where it says this proposal will focus on fees we are aware of, fees that we're already aware of, a citywide staffing studies not in scope. So just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, as reviewing both the JPA and the fee recovery proposal today, the fee recovery proposal in particular is really, because I understand how the scope could get unwieldy, for sure, that makes sense. But this would really be only focusing on some of these items that are listed here. And I won't read all of them because we can all see them. But it would only focus on these items that have been identified through the council budgeting process or other things. Is that, just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly?
Correct.
Okay.
Citywide or any fee, if you're to look at any department, I think that it's a big amount of work, and that a contractor and an independent person to come in and to work with the department directly would be important to complete that. So from a chief budget officer position, I have a limited amount of time. I have some time, but not enough time to do even a department-wide analysis.
Yeah. Okay.
Although to that point, we happened to learn in our budget process this past year that DSI wasn't fully covering their costs. We could ask that question more pointedly in future budget processes to other departments and learn the same information, and then say, bring that to the audit committee the next year, right? So it's not a frozen moment in time at which we have to only go off of that information.
Yeah, maybe that's where I was getting at just a little bit, is how and where have we asked that question, besides understanding that these very important and valid examples, some I understand more than others, are important as a part of this, but where else and how else has that net been cast, that we're interested in looking at fees from a cost recovery and now other aspect standpoint, which I think should be part of the conversation, and when and how can we ask that question in the future. If we go in this direction, understanding it's a topic, or making sure that other folks know in the city that this is the topic that we're interested in exploring, and besides these other examples that have just happened to come up, could there be other things that are unearthed? Very much understanding scope and bandwidth and how these are approached, and definitely not all at once. So,
Well, and again, and I'm sorry to keep monopolizing the mic here, but I do think that it is something we could ask departments to do some of this work in their budget presentations to us. We could say we want, because I keep coming back to this idea of scale, because I think Ms. Dilworth has rubbed off on me in terms of like level of risk gets down to, how much are these JPAs worth, or how many of these costs are we talking about? And if we could get a sense of the magnitude, that would make me more interested in focusing on that. But we could, instead of us having to do that work, we could ask the departments during our budget process to come in and give us an itemized list of your costs and JPA amounts or something like that. And that puts a big burden on our Office of Financial Services, but we tend to get the information we request during the budget process.
sorry, one more thing. I think your points about risk are important, and that's definitely rubbed off on me as well as part of this process. But so I don't know, not being in this work every day, I'm not sure if these are the riskiest ones or not, or if there's other ones that we're missing. And so from a not trying to create a whole nother process standpoint, it sure makes sense to me that part of the regular budget process that's already happening, this might be folded into that. I think that gets a little bit at maybe what I was trying to get at originally, of where are the questions answered and when are we casting the net. Well, let's fold it into another robust process that's already happening, and that'll also benefit this work.
Mm-hmm. All right.
One is, for example, sorry, I didn't ask to be recognized, but one good example is what has happened with our public safety costs for community festivals, is that when the police determined the increased need based on what's been happening around the country at community events, and how much that they were actually, how much it really cost to provide police services for our events, that led to a decision that we had to charge all of our community festivals additional money. And it gets at what you're talking about, Dana, which is, are some of these things costs that we want to take on because of the importance of the work in our neighborhoods?
Yeah, ironically, does a festival not happening actually contribute to some of the crime or issues that the police are dealing with, because there's not that community building aspect and that relational aspect that these events bring? And so just looking at it purely from a money standpoint, yeah, it makes sense to charge more, but looking at it from a public good standpoint, do community festivals increase the public good and public safety, or the city should be subsidizing that interaction on some level? and where is that level, right? I mean, there's a decision to be made there as well. But and those are kind of considerations when we're thinking about these things. Are vacant building fees, an individual homeowner is often in that position for not very fun reasons versus a commercial entity, whether it's individual housing or an apartment building or a commercial building. It may be a whole host of reasons, which may actually be really good economic sense to sit there with a vacant building for a while. And so thinking through what do we want for our neighborhoods and our communities.
Right.
Any other questions or comments for Ms. Houston? Otherwise, I want to thank you for this work. I want to recognize that the good news is you're leaving us in a really strong position for your successor, not your replacement, to pick up this work. The bad news is it may be some time before that person is on board. And so, at least to me, it seems that we are talking about leaving these with our comments, with our questions, fresh and ready for the next person to come in. But there won't be a next person very quickly, which is unfortunate. But it's also a good segue to our next topic on our agenda, which is other consultancy help. But
Thanks, Holly.
thank you so much, Ms. Houston.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on this topic before we move on?
I'd like to add, if anybody has feedback, to email them directly to me.
All right, so with that, we'll move on to our second topic, which is continued discussion about creating a standing contract for multiple short-term studies. Dana DeMaster, Trina Chernos, and Nia Vang were part of a small but mighty subcommittee to consider this, and I will turn it over now to whoever is best on that group to talk about what we have in front of us. Don't all talk at once.
Well, I guess I can speak to it a bit, and please jump in here. We discussed that the goal is to create this opportunity to be nimble and not just have one large study per year, but the ability to do several smaller studies that may take a few weeks to a few months, but having kind of an open professional services contract similar to having a legal retainer for an evaluator. And we found out that this is something we can do. There's not really any barriers to doing this, but we'd wanted to define some few things that we felt as our small but powerful subcommittee we wanted to bring back to this group to get some guidance on before we actually went through and created a RFP to send out there. And so the next steps in discussion, we kind of identified that the number of studies, if I would have read this ahead of time, I'm sorry, I've been so busy, that up to 4 a year, just keeping it broad at the beginning, because up to 4 buys us more opportunities than saying up to 3 and then wanting 4, even if we only do 3.
Okay.
But having up to 4 short-term studies over the course of a year, we'd expecting each of these studies to take less than 3 months. That we'd want that would be payable upon deliverable, so not an invoicing model so much as when we get the deliverable for each of those. And then kind of the things to think about for this group would be what are some of the key characteristics of an organization or a person that we want them to have. And so we talked about something like around having experience with city government evaluation, operations, or understanding of processes at a city government level, data analysis, but then being more specific about what kinds of evaluation we'd want. And so kind of what are the types of people or firms would we want to attract to this? And I don't think we have to get overly detailed because a lot of that can be as long as we're clear, right? But then in the RFP assessment or scoring phase, if there's a level of detail we want to have, that's something that, at least my understanding of how the RFP process works, they would then get, there's the scoring criteria. And we discussed that the potential deliverables, we'd be expecting to see an evaluation plan, identifying the data collection methods, the data collection, some kind of final report with recommendations, and then doing a presentation before the audit committee or the city council would be, and so that payment would be upon the report and the presentation. And so that was the main kind of things. Trina, do you want to add anything? Or did I miss anything?
Madam Chair, No, I think that's an accurate summary of what our subcommittee talked about. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so I guess the main discussion for us as a group then are, what kinds of key criteria would we be looking for in an organization that are going to be important to us?
Mr. Farnsworth.
Thank you, Councilmember Naker. A quick question before getting to that question. If looking on here, number 6, about securing the ongoing budget commitment from the City Council, I guess maybe this has been talked about in the past, but assuming that we went this far, that there is without it being official yet, there's an appetite for that, for this kind of work through, to get to something like a resolution to make this official, understanding that it's a little bit cart before the horse at this point. But.
I think so. We have already an ongoing commitment to use kind of the leftover dollars from our city budget each year, which has typically been, we've budgeted mentally, and it's turned out to be about $50,000. And there is definitely an appetite on the council to allow us to be more nimble and conduct more frequent audits. So I think that, if we were to ask for multiple ongoing years, that's difficult to do because we budget annually. But I think the commitment is there.
Yeah, that's the sense that I've gotten. We discussed it at our organizational meeting.
Great.
And I think that interest will only deepen once people realize that we can now take on audits of interest to them much more quickly.
Right.
So the question to the floor is, what criteria would we be looking for in such a consultant?
What kind of qualities, experience?
Let's just have an open conversation without signaling for, let's just talk.
Well, given how nimble we want to be, I think someone with experience with city government would be quite helpful.
Right. This is just a word thing, but would municipal be a little bit more flexible of a word than city?
I like municipal,
Local. Maybe this goes without saying, but it seems like the key quality of this person / I'm thinking really probably firm, is that they can be flexible enough to perform a broad range of studies, whether that's because they have enough people on staff to handle them, farm them out, or because they're just generalists, but they can't be phased by swinging wildly from one side of the local government pendulum to the other.
I would think the ability to engage with and build trust with both employees and community members who you might be engaging with in this is important.
Yep.
And so experience facilitating or working with both employees and community.
That's great.
Yeah.
They also need to be fast. They're going to get 4 studies done a year in 3 months. Like they have to be the kind of person / firm that can push through obstacles, that has a sense of urgency, that just does quick, good work.
Policy and research, are those policy research? Is that something that would be is that definable enough to help us narrow the
I think
field?
it falls within that municipal experience, but you could even call that out within that, like experience working with local governments and municipalities, understanding of policy, ordinance, and the impacts of those.
I guess one thing sort of gets to the whole idea of being accountable to and working with employees or engaging with employees and community members is, and maybe this is covered by the municipal experience question, but kind of how they're working with an audit committee and like who they're reporting to, and it's a little bit less of an internal, one contact. Obviously, we have a staff contact who coordinates this work with our consultants, but the fact that there's an audit committee and the city council and just kind of the structure in which they're reporting into, I think is notable.
So maybe experience reporting to either, local government boards and/or nonprofit boards, because I think that reporting to a group like that is
Right.
very different than
Right.
reporting to an individual. And so experience with accountability to a group.
Right, and so as you put in here in number 4, part of their monthly reports before the final report, that they're reporting to a group that meets publicly, and their reports are public, and that they're things, that being aware of that dynamic.
Would there be any value, and I tend to not be insular like this, but in saying that we maybe not require but prefer experience working with the city of St. Paul or relationships with people in the city of St. Paul? And I say that in part because, again, knowing that we would likely be depending on those relationships to do the research, to get information, not just public documents, but also hopefully working with departments. And because we're talking about doing more and more quickly, we're not going to have the long buildup of time to get all department directors fully on board and briefed. It might be more of a cold call, and somebody who's actually worked with city departments here before might be able to do that more skillfully.
That'll narrow the field probably significantly.
Yeah.
And then you won't get some of that just fresh blood perspective.
Right.
That's what I was going to say. I'd be concerned, like, are you then narrowing it so you're getting the same answers in kind of the same ways of thinking, versus if it's broader, then you have the ability to bring in new ideas and new ways of thinking.
That is the downside. I was thinking of, like Baker Tilly came and spoke to us, and they've worked with the city of St. Paul on numerous contracts, and that was something that was appealing because I knew that they knew all the players. But it's true, there would be fewer who could respond.
But you might not need as big a company like that, and this would give some smaller companies the ability to do
Right,
this type of thing.
that's true. Could you summarize what you've heard so far, Dana? That might trigger some more.
Yeah. City government or municipal experience, including understanding policy and ordinances and how those impact the way work is done, I guess. Flexible enough to do a broad range of projects. Experience engaging and building his trust with both employees and community. Experience being accountable to a group, like a board or nonprofit board or a elected body. That's what we've had so far. I also just think that, just saying in there that experience doing both qualitative and quantitative studies is probably, pretty basic.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about this, when I first served as a legislative aide in the late 90s, we had this kind of staff capacity where we were able to have our policy analysts do this kind of work. I mean, if a council member wanted to develop an ordinance, we were able to put a policy analyst on the job and get a lot of it done internally. And our audits were done internally then by the staff that was trained in an auditing system. So I feel like there are definitely people out there who have this kind of expertise, who do have that kind of flexibility, and who may have worked in another city government or county government, and are now consulting.
Any other?
That feels like a good space for me. I don't know.
I would just
Leanne?
add to verify that does the group agree that having up to 4 short-term studies enough for the year, and with the expectation that these studies be completed within 3 months would meet with your expectation? And that we has, I think, recommended that for each study, they're paid at whatever dollar amount that we estimate it to be, up to $50,000 for the whole project, right? That's what we had. So if you agree with that, that's what we will draft in our scope.
Do we think that that's enough? I guess I don't know. I'm asking the question.
I don't, but that's what we have. So sometimes what you have is what you.
Well, kind of quick question on that. So it's up to 4. Well, let's say, so a firm approaches this up to 4, but what if we, for some reason, only do 1? And then what is their,
Right.
and it's paid on
I
via
think
the
we have to
deliverables?
negotiate each individual project and have them say, this is what we're thinking, and then them say, this is how many hours, or this is what I expect to pay for this project, being aware that if it's like a $40,000 project, that might be the only project we get out of the year. And then, versus like if we could negotiate, this is a $15,000 project, and now we know we have $35,000 left. And so that would be part of the figuring out individually, I think. I don't think we could divide it like 4 into 50,000 and say each one is 12. Because what we might want might be one longer and a little bit more in depth, and then 2 very quick ones, right? And this gives us that option.
Well, maybe that's a criterion that we should, I don't know how to wordsmith this, but I think it's important to have somebody who can help us understand the like option A, B, and C of any potential topic we want to study, because I suspect this group is going to want to get more studies done than fewer, and it would be frustrating to have somebody on contract for to be able to do multiple studies but keep using up all of our budget in the first study and not have them be able to say, well, but there's a $20,000 model of this you could do, right?
Well, and I think too, maybe this is a term of art that didn't get spelled out very clearly, but under number 4 where it says an evaluation plan, I think that's also part of that is scoping out. Like if we did this, we'd get this much and it would cost this much, versus if we did this, here's your Cadillac model.
Right.
And so having that as part of the evaluation plan is the cost.
Yeah, no, that was helpful because I was trying to get at what would our expectations be versus what their expectations would be. And of course, the firm is the one that's putting the number forward. So there's that. But yeah, okay.
So just a process question for the RFQ. We're saying we should go forward with this even if it's not required. I'm wondering, first of all, is this something that would allow us to stay with the same firm year over year and not have to go to RFP again?
And that's the goal. And I think, Trina, we are going to be looking into that possibility. We contract with one specialist. I don't know how we call them yet. And they have a variety of experience because we don't know what the topic is going to be for them to do the study on. So we want to leave some options so that we either do another year renewal because, as we all know, the city council is changing next year. So we want to leave some option whether or not we want to contract with them again for another year or 2 to continue to do this kind of multi-study.
So can't you say with the option to renew?
Yeah, I like that.
But we do have to go through this competitive process to determine who that evaluator or specialist is going to be. And I think it's very helpful that you've identified the characteristic today, because that will help both Trina, Dana, and I to kind of scope something into more detail.
And so it sounds like, to Ms. Dilworth's point, we are saying number 2, the contract should be for 1 year, subject to
1 or 2, depending on what you guys are looking for.
And how long do we think it would take to the committee to put together an RFP for this and get somebody?
I would defer to both Dana and Trina's expertise. I don't know the legal aspect of it, so we're going to do some research in that area. And obviously, we need to follow with procurement in order to draft some kind of contract with 1 year, subject to a 1 year renewal or 2 year renewal. That is a possibility. So the legal part of it, we need to square it away, and then in terms of drafting out and the characteristic data tree that I would need to kind of flesh that out to get the best option for us.
Okay.
So I don't know, we have a meeting come up in April, and then we have one more in May. I don't know if we need a month to look at this further or 2 months to kind of draft the scope. 1 month?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by April at our next meeting, we should have something drafted for the committee to review.
Great. Is that all from the
I
committee?
think that's all from the
That's all from
subcommittee.
us.
Kudos
Yeah.
to the
Thank you.
subcommittee.
It's
Really good work.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we'll move on to number 3 on our agenda, which is continued surveys development. And as just a reminder, everyone, we were going to modify our survey from 2020. We were going to post it in a living space so that it's not just put out periodically, but it's available for people to fill out at any time. We were going to try to do a specific push to city staff and do a specific survey for city staff. And I think I'm going to turn it over to the head of our survey subcommittee, Mr. Farnsworth, to report.
All right. Well, this subcommittee was much less successful than the other subcommittee.
It's not a contest.
But I'll say two things, and I was focused a little less on the survey than on some of this other engagement work. So the second bullet point under this agenda item. And so I actually, more the engagement subcommittee than the survey subcommittee.
Sorry.
But no, that's okay. And so I don't have as much to say on the survey, but maybe we want to talk about that first, and I can give a brief report on the second item and where that's at. But maybe we should do that first.
That's a great, thank you. That's a perfect point of order. So, Ms. Zane, can you just remind us, this was emailed out in advance, and did people send you comments on it?
I've received nobody's response or edits.
Okay.
But I am open to getting more. We could work on the survey today.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an old survey, and
Yep.
the last time we did it, it was the same for both staff and residents. So it didn't make was very different at all. So this time, I think based on the last discussion, we want to split it out so that we can focus more on city versus resident.
Ms. Dilworth?
Well, I think that's part of my question, because the first thing that stuck out to me is, do you work for the city of St. Paul? And I don't know why you care. Because what does that mean? If you say yes, does it kick the survey someplace? Does it, because you're trying to get community, involvement, right, or engagement. And I don't think it matters whether they work for City of St. Paul or not.
Well, so I think to that point, that was a helpful refresher. I think we did talk about last time breaking
here.
things up into what is what does a new survey look like that's externally focused to community, that's really just going to be more of a portal. I can't think of the right term, but really function more as a portal on the audit committee's website, just to be able to have a place for folks any time of the year or any time of day to input details to communicate to the committee. Then there was talk about making a more formal ask each year to staff, and at least from my recollection, which may not be the official one, I think that was inspired by some of the work or the report back that we got on the customer service audit. And something that really stuck out to me was how much staff were driving and interested in that, and then driving the work groups' efforts to implement some things. And so to me, it made sense that, okay, well, then we should give a more formal, whether it's annually or otherwise, a way for staff to be able to engage on other topics besides those that are already engaged. And so I think, 2 would then be crossed out and put into something else that we don't have yet.
Well, I mean, yeah, and that's thank you. So, because in terms of staff, you want to have, and I don't know if it's in place or not, you want to have the whistleblower connection, and then you want to have just, something to say. So that would have to be a totally different mechanism and real confidential and all that. And then you have the community.
Well, and we were also talking about last time, like, as the staff survey wouldn't necessarily be like a whistleblower kind of telling on someone, but this is something I'm excited about or interested
That's what I mean. So
in.
you'd have to have 2.
Yeah, and having that's the groundwork, that lays the groundwork for buy-in in both the interest in the project, but then also the recommendations. And sometimes the best way to get leaders to act on recommendations is when their staff are asking for it. And so that was kind of where we're going with that, versus like community engagement, not just being a survey, but being actually like going out and, but that was the second part of the thing of your committee.
Yeah.
I don't want to like.
So this is a
steal your
report we
thunder.
eagerly await.
No, well, please don't get too excited. But I think, but that's kind of an interesting point now. I mean, when there's an ask being put out to staff, the goal, I would share that goal around, it was really inspired by the buy-in that we're seeing in this other topic, but then to create an opportunity for staff to be able to respond to more of an official, hey, we want to hear from staff. The audit committee wants to hear from staff. I think there could be things like what you're talking about, Stephanie, that come out as a result of that. I mean, folks are going to have to engage with that opportunity the way that they want to, and there could be some replies or things that are elicited out of a process like that that would have to be dealt with. And so I don't think we should be surprised if something like that happened. But I think the goal of it is to create that, and so, yeah.
So what if, for sake of process, we looked through, are people okay doing this together? Because it seems like we sort of failed to do it on our own, which is fine. If we went through these questions with an eye towards first the community survey, and then went through them again with an eye toward how we would modify that if that were the staff survey, do people?
I think a little bit of conversation with that would be good. Then I'm happy to happy to officially fold that into the committee,
Okay.
Subcommittee, and then be the one that works with Nia to work through some of that to then bring drafts back. So if anyone has any ideas, that would be great.
Okay, so high-level conversation, not wordsmithing here, that you can then bring back.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to commit to
Yeah,
that to
okay.
make sure that that's on our radar. Yeah, absolutely.
So what I already heard was, for the general community, we don't need to know if they work for the city of St. Paul. And I also heard that, putting this aside for the moment when we come back to it, but for the city staff survey, we should have some way of having them indicate if they're whistleblowing. I mean, is that?
Well, the
what you-
whistleblowers is very confidential, and so actually, community or staff can be, because they could, a community person could, I could come up there and see something happening, and I could throw it into the whistleblower
Right.
bucket. So it's really not just staff.
Okay.
But there should be probably, and I don't know if it's on the audit webpage or somewhere, there needs to be where someone could report something if they saw something wrong happening.
I'm
So
wondering
that-
if that happens through the cities, like the civil rights, or like there's spaces where like,
Yeah.
like compliance,
could be.
or, is there a clear place where it's like, this law is being broken, it's a very specific.
Right, I don't know how the city handles it. So if it is in specific, is it in the office, the finance office, is it in, different places? But there should be that, right?
Right.
And then you have your staff and then your community.
And maybe there's language in these that say, if you are trying to whistleblow, that may not be a verb, here's a link to where you do that, as in this is not that place, but this place on the city's website is where you would report because I could see someone like seeing this as a place to maybe lodge that grievance.
Right.
So it's kind of a disclaimer to say, if you're using the whistleblower ordinance, then here's where you go.
Yeah.
And then, I think that people may still, to your point, I think people may still anonymously want to use this forum to call attention to something that they're concerned about without having to list their name.
They may not know that it fits, that it's really, really bad. Or something like that.
Well, because I think if you look at our mission online, and now being involved in a few different audit committees, all audit committees are a little bit different, right? And so if you look at our mission online, it talks about oversight and transparency and accountability, and the mission language is actually a little, well, not different. It's all related, and that's embedded within all of this. But if you just look at the mission, we're doing much more than that and focusing on different things. And so it very well could yield. And I don't expect the average person to necessarily be familiar with the details of what an audit committee does. So it could very well yield that kind of thing. And so some kind of language, it's great that we have someone from the city's attorney's office here for these conversations, but some kind of language, or there's probably some technical term for what this would be that I think would definitely be important to include.
As I look at the survey, a couple other things I would add. I think we should consider for number 4, making that a multiple choice and listing the departments at the very least.
Drop-down menu.
A drop-down menu, yeah, so that it's.
For the city staff, they want the departments to be listed?
Both. Yeah, I think for both.
Yeah.
For ease of analysis, just list the departments.
Okay.
I would just, in general, some of these questions are really negative.
Yeah.
They're just, I'm concerned the department is not, and what concerns versus, I don't know, there's some really cool ideas or things to learn that are really positive too, right? What is the impact of having free recreation services to youth, right? And that's a really positive question. And so kind of rethinking those to either frame them in a neutral way or just not negative. Are there ways, it's not that you have to have a concern. Maybe there's a question you're just curious about that could be of actual great value.
And I agree with, oops, sorry.
I'm sorry, you talking about number 5, Dana?
Both 5 and 6 are both
5 and
worded
6.
negatively, and so just thinking about ways to word that either more neutrally or having at least, having a more positive, not a positive spin, but like
More neutral.
more neutral, because it's, you don't want it to be a survey where people just call to complain about their snow plowing if it's winter, or, their garbage removal if it's summer, or whatever. Like what are those questions that are, what has been the impact of the ARPA dollars in the city, right? I mean, like, that's a pretty neutral question.
Right. I was going to ask, not to keep harping on risk, whether we should get at that somehow in a question. Like, in what way is, and this is getting, but this makes it negative, so I'm not sure how to address it.
Well, and I
but-
don't know if maybe staff would understand risk, but I don't know the community would understand risk and that what we mean by that. And so that's something in the evaluation criteria. I think we, like having that within our rubric of what we actually pick. But that's an expertise or a level that I don't know that most people are gonna, I don't even fully understand that.
I think we were trying to get at that with 5, like, the concern about just opening up very broadly for what people want to explore is that it could very easily lend itself to things that aren't really audits.
Yeah.
And so we were trying to get at that with 5. If any of these things were true, then we would know if there was a risk. But it does then lend itself to negative framing. So. But I hear
So
you
that,
saying
I mean,
risk is
even
one.
what would you like the audit committee to investigate? Investigate means something is bad.
Yeah.
So you could say explore.
Yep. Learn about.
Yep.
And that's what, especially with the public one,
Analyze
ensuring
or
that it's
study.
not at a higher grading level than like 6th grade.
Right.
And so words like investigate, just from the point of view of like being difficult to understand and complex words,
Right.
would generally want to avoid that too.
So since we're updating this, how would you like to reword question number 3?
So I think, Mia, what we decided was we were just going to give like these high-level comments, and then the subcommittee made up of James and you was going to work together
Okay.
on like
That'd be
the
good. Well, I just
specific
want to
wording.
understand for myself as I'm editing it, so.
So instead of
Okay.
investigate, say, use explore,
Explore.
review, or
Yep.
consider,
Analyze, evaluate,
or,
study.
I'm taking a bunch of notes too, so.
Yeah, you and I will compare notes.
Great.
Okay.
Are there other sort of buckets of things that we want to ask about or not ask about? We ask about demographic information.
Does it make sense to ask any just out and out positive question like, what do you think works really well? Just to,
I mean, besides being nice to read, what else would be the function of that?
yeah.
Sometimes those things are really helpful from an evaluation or auditing perspective. I mean, they're not getting to the risk necessarily, but like thinking about something that the city may want to invest more in. So is this a return on investment study, ripple impacts of something that is going well? And this is something, maybe the city should be putting more into versus just fixing things that are not working as well. Because there's that aspect
Right.
too.
So sort of opportunities that we could be maximizing
Yeah.
versus risks we could be avoiding. Other thoughts on this from a community standpoint? Otherwise, maybe we can switch to what we would want to ask staff as different from this.
well, actually, that question would be a good one for the staff,
The opportunities. Yeah.
or opportunities for efficiencies, or
Yeah,
where do
so I
you
was kinda
see
thinking-
I like that.
where there could be greater efficiency?
Right, because people in the public won't know that, but
Right.
staff definitely, yeah.
You know, Mayor Latimer was mayor for 14 years, which was a nice long time for him to really develop a relationship with staff and to get the city working in a way that that employees identified with him. And one of the programs that he had for staff was something called the Work Simpler competition. And he invited staff anywhere, at any level, to submit a grant proposal for something that they could demonstrate would help them get their work done better or that would benefit the city, some kind of expenditure. And it was amazing. I think they awarded one every month. And, you know, it might be a couple $1,000s, it might be a few hundred, but it really got staff at all levels imagining how they could be doing their jobs better. So when you talk about, you know, are there efficiencies, or I love that idea of asking the staff to name things that they think could be done better, yeah. and how, or I think that could be great.
Particularly post-pandemic. Things
Yeah.
are so different, right? There could
Absolutely.
be, you know, staff might have other thoughts.
No, I think that kind of gets at a little bit of what Dana was talking about earlier on the community side, but asking for opportunities. But the efficiency part is mission related to what we're doing. And so that was an interesting example. Councilmember Prince, I did not know that city history before, but I think it definitely makes sense to ask staff about where can we achieve greater efficiencies? How can we make, what work and projects can the audit committee undertake to make folks' job in the city easier? You know, similar to your example, my roommate works for a large corporation, but she runs their innovation division, and they do internal innovation challenges, and it kind of all gets at this efficiency part. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Anything else we'd want to ask specifically of staff?
Yeah, I think the staff feedback would be particularly helpful for us. Understanding that we don't have a piece of paper that reflects that, we can kind of do all this formatting stuff, but what some general topics, direction, I think would be helpful.
Well, I think the other questions are good. You know, once you make a more neutral or positive tone, it's just adding a couple more.
Do we want to ask staff a specific question about risk? And would they be able to understand that and identify that more readily, as people were saying earlier? I mean, I guess in part because if a staff member does know about something where there's a risk to the city, I would like to know.
So if I have a question, and this is probably to the mechanics of the survey. If we make number 4 a drop-down list, that means that they pick just one program? Because the next question is about this department or this program. So how do they relate?
It depends on what kind of survey software you're using. But most like survey programs, you could do like a multiple list and then have the pop-up of like, this is my thing about this department. Do you want to add another department? Do you have a second question, right? And then have it be another pop-up. Or you could have, they have multiple where you can check multiple buttons as well. Like just click one or click as many.
Yeah.
And so
Well, I
there'd
just
be a
wondering-
couple ways that logistically it could happen.
Okay.
Depending if you're using, you know, which survey software.
Yeah, because we need to know what department they're talking about
Yeah.
in 5.
I almost wonder if we should just get rid of 5, because it's got the negative framing, and I think it's unlikely that we're going to I think 6 is the critical question, where it's not like 5 is gonna allow us to like bucket things sufficiently without looking at 6. You know, if we were talking about thousands of responses and we needed to like filter them, 5 might be coming in handy, but I think we're gonna all be reading the text box of 6.
I would agree. The last time we did this survey, number 5, all of them were checked off. And there wasn't a whole lot of detail explaining it.
Sure, people were just hitting all of them.
Okay.
Yeah, so it makes sense
Oh,
that
'cause
we
this was-
that we eliminate
You
it.
could check more than one, obviously, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
And then you get rid
Does
of the
it-
whole, it's more than one department issue too.
Does it make sense to make it part of the question without, just as giving examples, giving a few of those things as examples?
Yeah, maybe we do that in 6. We highlight, like, for example, it's not operating in a safe manner. It's not making, there are opportunities for greater value.
Yeah.
Do we care about knowing where staff live? Just throwing it out there, not really.
I would assume we would get rid of
Gotta
that.
get rid of that, okay.
Then I guess the follow-up, the section 3 for staff, I presume that may have a little bit of a different connotation, or there becomes some different dynamics at play there. So I don't know how to proceed on that. But.
Well, this just says if you would like the committee to contact you. You
And then
think
who
that's
is
a
that?
problem?
Is that Nia or?
yeah, just me.
Or you could even just put, rather, I don't know, like, I don't know. Is there a reason we'd want,
We did it because last time we actually had one person who raised a question that wasn't within our city's purview to answer. And it was more of a state and federal question. So we were able to follow up and tell them that we're not the correct local government to address that particular question. And so we're able to pass it along. So that was helpful.
would you, rather than what city, would you want a question of like, what is your role, and have it be really broad, like line staff, supervisor, manager, director, right? Like something like that, like just that. And so you wouldn't identify an individual, you wouldn't even know a department necessarily, but like just, I'm a line staff, I'm a supervisor, manager, or I'm, however that works in the city's job classes, but
Just to better understand.
just
where
to
this is
better
coming
understand
from.
what the concerns of, say, if a lot of the same things are coming in from line staff versus leadership, that might be telling, or
Would a similarly useful question be about length of service? Would that be at all helpful to know, like, so this is someone who's been here for 40 years, this
Yeah.
is someone who's new, I mean, not that you would discount either or give either, but it might be interesting.
and that could just be a multiple choice, like not enter your years of service, but just like less than a year, between 1 and 5 years, or, whatever is meaningful.
Not the exact number, but yeah, that makes sense.
So we don't want them to be able to give us their name and contact information if they would like to?
No, my only question is I don't if I think that's fine. I didn't know if that works or should be thought of differently.
I still
I
like
don't
the idea of
mind
giving
it.
them an option.
Yeah.
In addition to the other data you were suggesting.
Well, no, I think it's good to have the option and then just having them understand like how it's going to be followed up with. And besides,
I remember-
Yeah, understanding how it's followed up with is the key.
maybe that's more
That's
of what
the
I'm.
key, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and whether you fill this out and don't put your name, having that response back to the staff saying, thank you, 20% of you filled out this survey, and this is what we found, and this is what we're deciding, or, this is, like, that follow-up is super important
Right.
To everybody.
to everybody.
Regardless of, yeah. This time we actually, I remember, had somebody from staff who had like a personal problem that was raised that we were able to kind of follow up on that hadn't been raised elsewhere, and it was just one more touch point,
Great. Great.
All right, any other comments on this? Otherwise, we can shift. Hopefully that gives the subcommittee what it needs.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And then we can shift to the report we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, please. Again, the report's gonna be super short, and so this committee our meeting was the refocus the subcommittee needed. So, I want to be clear though, and credit to Nia that Nia and I did meet briefly to talk about this engagement work, and so basically just to recap for folks. This came up during discussions in the past about surveys, this survey, but then how we were going to push this out, and some education pieces around the audit committee in general. And I think I left the last meeting thinking about, and I believe this was Dana's suggestion, from a capacity standpoint, thinking about a quarterly engagement calendar of some sort, that would then split the engagement efforts. One, just to make sure we're promoting if we're going to do a survey and do other things, make sure that we're promoting and actually making sure that people are aware of it. But then also thinking about other opportunities as well, and splitting the load a little bit in between committee members, understanding that something like this can have an endless lid unless we think about, or no lid, and thinking about ways we want to do this. And so I think kind of the few different tasks that have been talked about in the past are, one, engagement specifically around promotion of finalized topic selection survey. When the community side, I think the staff side, though, I would assume are more kind of processes that are internally ran by NIA and promoted through whatever the existing channels are. So to be clear, thinking more about the community survey in particular, and how do we make sure that folks know initially that that's out there, but then that will be staying there, and maybe we revisit that a year over year. But then some other opportunities that I think we're inspired by some of the other work you've been doing to talk with and get in front of district councils. Some of us may be doing a presentation at a local civic group coming up here, which would be great. And there's all sorts of other opportunities that come up. And so Nia and I talked a little bit about, from a material standpoint, what may be needed for that. I have a copy of we're going to work on kind of a slide deck type thing that isn't overly formal, but that we can use and adapt in different settings. And that work has started. And so then I think having this mapped out and what the deliverables are, which would be that slide deck and kind of any other materials that folks may find useful, again, adapting from things that we already have and language that we already have about the committee and our work, and then thinking about that quarterly engagement calendar. And so the documents aren't quite ready to be reported on today, but now helpful that I can make the next meeting because it got moved. Not that the work couldn't continue without me. But
You're a large part of the committee.
well, yeah.
Subcommittee.
And so looking forward to circulating those with folks very soon, but understanding to have a little bit, I'd say what was helpful about our last conversation was narrowing and refining the scope a little bit. And now that it's clear that we're also take the next steps with the survey as well. I think that's kind of where we're moving forward, and hopefully have lots of things for you to review very soon.
Great.
Any questions for Mr. Farnsworth?
I just wanted to reiterate that from last time, the community engagement isn't just about the survey.
Right.
I think surveying is like the lowest form of community engagement, and everyone's surveyed out. But really that discussion and the relationship building and sharing that this committee exists, and having that ongoing conversation with different existing groups in the community, and how important that is to understanding what kind of topics we should be looking at.
Yeah, I think there's the initial promotion that we finished the survey, but what I'm particularly more interested in is exactly that. I think there's different, we've talked about some different venues like district councils. What materials do we need to aid to be able to have those kinds of conversations? But I appreciate that framing, because I think that's what really needs to ground our work and engagement, is having conversations. What different venues do we need to do that in? To make sure from an awareness standpoint, but then also from a participatory standpoint, especially if we're going to ramp up and do multiple projects. And like, this groundwork is really important to support all this other great stuff that we talked about today. So that's definitely worth restating as we continue with this work.
Well, thank you so much to the subcommittee for that work, and the work that I know is upcoming. That brings us to the end of our agenda. And so I think what I'll do at this point is ask Ms. Bang to just recap what our next steps are that you've heard, and what it sounds like we're talking about doing at our April meeting.
Yep, so just a reminder that at our April meeting, the meeting has been moved from the 3rd to the 10th. We will not be meeting in this room. We'll be meeting in hearing room 330. There are two topics that came out of today's discussion. One is that the subcommittee that's going to explore those multiple contracts. We're going to be presenting back to the committee some kind of scope for the committee to review and for us to start drafting the RFQ, RFP. And then the second agenda item that we'll be walking through is bringing back two surveys, one for the city specifically, one for residents, city staff specifically, one for residents. And then James and I will put together a slide deck for the audit committee to use as their material when they're meeting with district council or other interested parties in the city. And so that's, I think, what we have at the next April 10th meeting. And then I will also follow with Director Goodman regarding the Baker Tilly. We didn't talk about it today, to follow up with the Baker Tilly contract, where we are on that, and when the study can resume. So I will provide some update on that as well.
And just to clarify one thing, I had thought we'd said that in April we'd see a draft RFP, not a draft scope for an RFP. Did I get that wrong?
It's a scope for RFP or RFQ. So RFQ, you would just submit it to a list of known evaluator, and they can submit it within that period, and that's usually not a closed application process. An RFP process is a closed process, and it's put on the city's portal, and anybody can bid for it. So it depends on whether or not we want to go the route of known evaluator or the route of everybody, open up for everybody.
Well, I think maybe we should figure that out today, because I thought we were going to be looking at a draft of whatever document that is that we're going to actually be putting out.
And both can be changed, yeah. The language will be very similar. The only difference is how you solicit.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess that would be helpful to have some clarity on that today, and I'm not quite, I'm not even close, not knowledgeable professionally of what the benefits or the pros and cons to doing either one of those would be, and so I'd look to more of the experts on that committee to give us guidance on that.
I have a question. So going with the open route, which I lean towards because I think then you bring in more new voices and opportunities, and you're not just always going to the same organizations. How does the city advertise that? Is that like through Demand Star? Do people get a list? I mean, is there, like, how would someone find out that that opportunity is even there?
The RFP, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
The RFP process, we would, the last time we did it, we sent out a press release announcing that we will be putting the study out there and that they can go through the city's portal to submit their response. And the RFQ, we had identified, I think, 10 consultants out there, and we specifically invited them.
Does the city also advertise RFPs, though, that have been like through
We did
electronic
not advertise the
notification?
RFQ because we had identified the evaluator or consultant.
What about the RFPs, though? I think Dana's question was, does the city have a way of letting, like,
RFP
providers,
sent out a
procurement
news
vendors?
release.
It's sent out a news release, and anybody who signs up for the city's process procurement, then they already get notified. Because
So people who have already have submitted a bid and
Yep.
or in the past would get a list of the new opportunities,
Right.
and then there's a press release that
That
goes
goes out.
out to the general
everybody.
everybody.
Yep.
We sent out a press release in this case. I don't know that
Yeah.
typically departments do that, but
Yeah,
Yep.
I vote for the RFP.
me too.
Yeah, the process is pretty
Me too.
similar. Yeah.
Not that I vote, but.
Okay.
sounds like we're hearing RFP.
RFP is
And we'll see a
good.
draft RFP in April.
I prefer that too.
Okay. Great.
Because I'll have to look for a known evaluator consultant, and that will bug all of you. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else to come before us before we adjourn? Seeing none, thank you everyone for your time. Stay dry from the slush, and we are adjourned.
Thanks.
talk to you about carbon monoxide and carbon monoxide alarms. Carbon monoxide is a gas that's colorless, tasteless, odorless, and deadly. To protect yourself and your loved ones, you should have a carbon monoxide alarm on every level of your home and within 10 feet of each sleeping area. Remember to test the carbon monoxide alarms monthly and replace the battery yearly. Replace your alarm before you hear the end-of-life alert. If the alarm makes a continuous loud noise, get everyone outside.